Have you started your Christmas shopping yet? I'm not talking to you. Wow. So you've been to some malls already and you see that shopping malls no longer have a nativity scene in there at Christmas anymore. Have you been to the Christ Kindle Market that just opened this weekend? It has had in the past a live nativity scene. Have you been to Waterloo Park? Will you go to Waterloo Park this year? They have a nativity scene there that is made by Palestinian Christians, almost life-size, that is made out of olive wood. It's quite spectacular. But we shouldn't be surprised that when we go shopping, that the stores and the malls don't have this symbol of our faith, the nativity scene. We live, after all, in a culture and in a day and age which is not a Christian age. We don't live in a Christian country anymore. And as Christians, we should be more concerned about living as Christ to the people that we meet than we should be about whether there's a nativity scene at the mall or not. Jesus came to save us, human beings, from being packs of rats that feed on each other. And instead, we are to be like sheep who feed together and care together as we seek together to follow Jesus. Last week, and indeed it seemed like the whole of this past week, was all about Black Friday. Not Good Friday, Black Friday. Although there are many people in the culture who think it was very good. And you could see the lineups, especially in the States, but also here in Canada, where Black Friday and Cyber Monday and Black Friday week specials have taken hold strongly, that there were lineups, huge lineups of people who were there hours and hours and sometimes 12 hours or a day before the stores would open for these sales in order to get the best deals for themselves, to maybe even get all of their Christmas shopping done in just one weekend. And while they're shopping, and while they're behaving a bit like rats, trying to get the best for themselves, they're listening to the background music of Christmas. Although it's a little bit different. You see, our sentimental and yet also somewhat cynical culture likes to start singing and hearing Christmas songs shortly after Halloween. Once the malls start putting up and the stores start putting up some semblance of Christmas decorations. But have you listened to the music that is coming through the stores, speaker systems, and in the malls? They may be Christmas, but they're more like songs such as Jingle Bells and We Wish You a Merry Christmas and I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. I mean to break up the song. Instead of hearing songs like O Little Town of Bethlehem, Hark the herald angels sing, joy to the world. You won't hear those very often while you're out in stores. The world wants and the world needs to celebrate something as profoundly wonderful as Christmas. But our culture is doing its best to ensure that Christ is not in Christmas that the stores and our culture celebrates. Perhaps the first Christmas carol that Christians should be singing, in keeping with the theme of Advent, traveling with hope, is the Willie Nelson song called On the Road Again. Stores have their cut rate sales. Maybe even Sears does too right now. They're trying to sort that out. And as holiday partying and parades and posturing swamps and can swamp every aspect of our lives, it's good to stand back and to look at the bigger picture. What's the purpose for which Christmas is here? What's the purpose for which Christ came into our world in the first place 2,000 years ago? So let's get on the road again with a journey back to Bethlehem again and beyond Bethlehem, and the reason why that initial journey was taken in the first place. Here we are, the first Sunday in Advent, the official start of the Advent and Christmas season. And what was our Bible reading about? It wasn't about warm fuzzies, about a little newborn baby being given as a gift to all the world. It was about the end of the world, it sounded like, didn't it? A little bit of doom and gloom, coming judgment. And you're all sitting there while I was reading the scripture, and you're reading the words on the screen, and you're thinking to yourselves, this is Christmas? This is about, how festive is this scripture passage? But look again. It's all connected. Jesus never tells his followers to hunker down, to dig in deep, and not go anywhere when things get tough. Jesus isn't helping his disciples to plot their exit strategies when challenges to life and faith are real and all around us, almost all the time. Jesus' words for the church this first week of Advent, at the time when we prepare for the coming of one of the greatest of all miracles in life so far, are not to hide, but to, quote, stand up and lift your heads. How many of us as Christians, when other people may recognize that we're a Christian, we kind of go, we don't want to be recognized. We don't want to be seen saying grace, giving thanks before a meal in a public place. How many of us ever live at times almost ashamed of being a Christ follower? But did you hear what Jesus said in Luke's gospel? Stand up and lift your heads. Because we know, as Jesus says, that our redemption is drawing near. That's why we can stand up at any point, anywhere, anytime, and raise our heads. The same power and the same purpose that enabled Jesus' disciples then to stand up and raise your heads when the seas and the stars are rocking and roaring, invites each one of us to set out at this time of the year on a renewed journey to Bethlehem and beyond. Advent is to be the time when we do stand up and lift up our heads and start on the journey from where we're at to stop at for a while at the source of one of the greatest, and I say one of the greatest miracles in this life, the birth of the Son of God, and then go beyond that point. To go from our safe, stable status quo to the explosive stable in Bethlehem, where the most revolutionary moment in human history took place, and then to go beyond that to the end of time. During these weeks of Advent and Christmas, we aren't just singing Christmas carols about the night of the birth of Jesus Christ. We're traveling down a road of faith. It's been called a highway of holiness, a road that looks at the incredible life of gracious love and compassion that Jesus lived in his 3 years of public ministry. A journey that looks at his death, as horrendous as it was, on the cross. And beyond that, to the empty tomb, to his resurrection. And beyond that, to look at and embrace the promises that Jesus made about his return. And to look at the miraculous transformation that Jesus' life, death, resurrection, ascension, and coming again makes for the existence of every human being on this planet. What's my favorite question, Barb?
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Barb's voice got deep and projected from the back of your ventriloquist. Can you imagine? At this time of year, maybe I should be asking you, can you imagine what it would have been like if you were there 2,000 years ago? But I'm not. I'm going to ask you instead something really different. Can you imagine a world, our world, where Christ never came 2,000 years ago? Can you imagine what it would be like to live in such a world? A world in which you and I would not be here today, gathered to worship God. Jesus' first coming, in what we call the Nativity story, the Star of Bethlehem, pointed the way. That's the precursor to the ultimate miracle ever promised. His return. His second coming. His coming again. And the time when God sets all things right and heals all of life, all of creation forever. Luke's text today takes pains to expand the scope of the Son of Man's mission beyond the confines of Bethlehem, where he was born, beyond the confines of Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, beyond the confines of Jerusalem, where Jesus died outside of that city, beyond the confines of the boundaries of the Jews and the Gentiles. The Son of Man who offers redemption has nothing less than a cosmic impact. The sun, the moon, the sea, the stars, all of them, Jesus says in this passage, will announce and embrace the return of Jesus. Advent means far more than just waiting for Christmas. It implies the arrival of something new. It hearkens to the promises yet to come again about the return of Jesus. Are we disposed to receive something new this Advent season? Advent is a universal time of change. And we can either get with the change that Jesus has started 2,000 years ago with his birth in Bethlehem, or we can get out of the road and out of the way. Advent beckons us to get on the road to Bethlehem and beyond, to thinking again about his return. Being on the road to Bethlehem means that no matter what crosses the pavement in front of us, nothing can slow up our progress. In the Old Testament book of Judges, one of the most inspiring leaders on the way for Israel was the divinely anointed and divinely appointed prophet, the judge, by the name of Deborah. She was also a poet, and her song, called the Song of Deborah, in Judges chapter 5, is recognized as one of the earliest and most beautiful literary pieces in all of Scripture. But within Deborah's song of celebration dangles this strange little curse as well. This powerful leader of the Israelites praises all those tribes and all of those communities of God's people who had responded to the Lord's call to come together and to fight against their enemies. But then there was one little town that was singled out, the little hill community of Meroz, singled out for cursing and not blessing. The angel of the Lord condemned that town for not stepping up, for not getting in the road and helping all the rest of God's people, for not being there for Israel when Israel needed it the most. The little town of Meroz didn't step up. It hunkered down. And it's a contrast to the story of the little town of Bethlehem. And when it was Bethlehem's turn to step up, it eventually did. No red carpet, to be sure, was rolled out for the first coming of the King of Kings. Only a pauper's place was available, the stable with some animals in it. But the offer was made, and the offer of a place to stay for the birth of the King of Kings was accepted. A momentary haven and a temporary home were made. And the strangers, Mary and Joseph, and then the baby Jesus, were welcomed. And then even the visitors of those visitors were also welcomed. The shepherds and the wise men. There were two kinds of people in the world, and we could define all sorts of different types of two different kinds of people. But in our context this morning, there are those who step up and those who step back. And those who step up tend to get things done. And those who step back tend to critique how things could have been done differently. Advent's about stepping up and raising our heads for Christ. About putting one foot in front of the other as we travel down the road towards the miracle of Bethlehem and beyond, to the miracle that's not yet been realized, the miracle of a brand new, whole new creation. This is the beginning and the end of the Christmas story. Jesus came to earth in the most unassuming form. A little baby, born without wealth, without any power, and without fanfare. And the people to whom the announcement of his birth was made were those who were the lowest of the low in Hebrew culture, the shepherds. In today's gospel text, Jesus is very close. He's on the verge of facing his death as a criminal, convicted by his own people and by the oppressive Roman Empire as well. Jesus came into this world as a nobody, only known by a few to be Lord of Lords and King of Kings, about to die again as a nobody. But his mission and his message were so expanded by his words to his disciples and by his actions that Jesus included all of Jerusalem, all of Israel, all of the Gentile nations, which is the whole rest of the world, and the entirety of the cosmos. Jesus' proclamation was nothing less than for the transformation of everything according to God's divine plan. The Advent journey down the road to Bethlehem and beyond is nothing less than making our hearts anew a place for Christ to live. That we would stand up and lift our heads on the road to Bethlehem and beyond. Because it's a lifestyle, an adventure that is unlike anything else in all the world. Thanks be to God.